Are we going to do a roll call?
Yes. Go ahead and click on it, make sure our video's up. Okay, I think, Marilyn, we are ready to get started here.
Okay, we'll call the meeting of the Mendocino Planning Commission meeting to order. Just to talk a little bit about how we're going to do this today. Effective March 27th, 2020, the Mendocino County Planning Commission meetings will be conducted virtually and not available for in-person public participation pursuant to State Executive Order N-29-20. Meetings are live streamed and available for viewing on the Mendocino County YouTube page at https://www.youtube.com/Mendocino County Video. In order to minimize the risk of exposure during this time of emergency, the public may participate digitally in meetings by sending comments to pbscommissions@mendocinocounty.org in lieu of personal attendance. All public comment will be made immediately available to the commissioners, staff, and the general public as they are received and processed by staff and can be viewed as attachments to this meeting agenda at government/government-building-services/planning-building-agendas/planning-commission. Thank you for your understanding during this difficult time, and thank you for your continued interest. Could we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Wiedemann?
Here.
Commissioner Holkamp?
Commissioner Holkamp, you may be on mute. Thank you. Okay.
You actually had me muted.
Commissioner Purnell?
Here.
Commissioner Nelson?
Here.
Commissioner Perkins?
Here.
Chair Ogle?
Present.
Thank you.
And do we have a determination of legal notice?
Legal notice is determined to be proper.
Thank you. And now do we have a director's report?
Well, good morning. This is Brent Schultz, Planning and Building Services Director, and hope everyone's well. And somebody wanted me to, I think Julie asked me that Marilyn wanted to know a little bit about the Cannabis Equity Grant and what's going on with that. If you saw the press release, we're excited to announce that we won an allocation from the California Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. It's called Go Biz. And we were awarded $2,242,704. That will come to the county. It needs to be noted that the program is for the heritage growers and some other specific tasks that we wanted to get covered with the grant program. So program eligibility is determined based on asset or the criteria, including but not limited to prior nonviolent arrest history, cannabis-related expenses, asset forfeiture, and all this is in the press release that we put out. Services with the grant may include tiered or waiving of fees, assistance with your application, assistance with loans or grants, and a lot of it's geared to helping people through the regulatory hurdles that are very high to get a cultivation permit or facilities permit in our county and in the state. The next steps that we're going to be heading for right now is I've been looking at the grant agreement with the Office of Go Biz. We need to execute that. Then the board will adopt a budget. It will be this program will be in the cannabis division, so that will go in there. That will happen in June. And then after that, it's really resourcing the program and developing the program guidelines, application materials, and the criteria. We got to work with GoBiz staff to get that all in place and get moving. We estimate that's going to be summer this year is when we announce through a number of other press releases and other media that we're starting that program. So that's kind of generally what's going on with it, and pretty exciting that we got. We're one of the few that got the monies, and we're excited to see. There's a lot of people need a lot of help through all the CDFW water board issues, all the improvements they got to make. As I've said before, it's not an easy process to get through. And that concludes my presentation on the equity grant.
I just have a couple of questions. So will this funding be for salaries, or will it just be going to help those growers through the whole permit process? Has any money been spent yet? And could you explain what GoBiz is? Is that a county agency or state or what?
Yeah, GoBiz is a state agency. It's the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. It was set up a while ago. They're now taking over the grant responsibilities for the cannabis equity grant. And they've, Humboldt got money last year. I think San Francisco, LA got money and applied last year. This is our first year, and we're more looking at right now Humboldt and how they're doing their program, and as far as how we should do our program. And then we've got, we've worked with the cannabis stakeholders here in the county when we did the application. It was spearheaded by this application by Supervisor Williams. McCowan helped on it, and of course we got it. So that was very helpful. But a lot is yet to be determined on how it all works. It's new. This is brand new. Humboldt hasn't even spent any of their money yet. So we have a little over a year to spend the monies. So we want to hit the ground running and get it moving. Only 10% of the money can be used for overhead. So, but it does have some technical assistance help that we have in the grant. I think it's $200,000 that we could potentially bring in somebody to help us implement the grant. As I think I told you, or maybe I haven't, our cannabis unit has 3.5 full-time positions right now, and they got their hands significantly full with about 250 permits to keep renewing, and then about 1,000 applications from the old phase 1 ordinance, which is now over. But they're busy going through those every day.
Brent, I've got a question about this. For those heritage growers that meet the criteria for this new program, but have already applied through phase 1 or another phase, would they be eligible through this program for reimbursement of fees?
I think so. If I may, Julia Acker-Krog, I think we're in we just got the award letter just a couple weeks ago. So what I would like to do is if we could maybe halt the questions on this, or if you have additional questions, maybe follow up with us, but we could agendize this for a future meeting when we have more clear-cut answers too about how the rollout of this is going to go, because we don't want to give you any misinformation on that.
We don't have it. We applied, we got the grant, and now we're in how are we specifically going to build this program? Mm-hmm. And with the pandemic, we have been busy with that and still are busy with that. We, our staff has been working, on multiple issues, not just keep holding down their PBS jobs, but helping with this emergency event. So hopefully we get our staff back, we get more time to work on it, which hopefully we will, and then we can roll it out. But those questions I can better answer when we develop it.
So I think, what we could do is we'll agendize this under maybe matters from staff or something like that for a future agenda. And that way we can give you guys more clear-cut answers. But if you do have questions about the program, I would say please email those to both Brent and myself.
Yes.
And that way we can try to make sure that we have all of those answered when we come back to do a presentation.
You can also, if you want to go in and look at the application that we did, it's, we submitted it to the board. it's got everything. It's actually an interesting application, got a lot of information in it, and it does have a budget in there. We were asking for 5, but we got 2.2 million. So, and it breaks down where we want to provide assistance to our applicants, and it's all in the areas where the regulatory hurdles that they have at the state of California, that they have with us to get through, that they're having difficulty, and a number of other areas. But we have to dig down into each one and write up how does that precisely work and who does qualify. So,
Well, congratulations on getting the grant. That's wonderful.
and I just wanted to also state that, you know, the CEO's office worked really hard on this. We engaged a consultant. The Center for Rural Policy at Humboldt State worked on this with the application. They've been successful in helping, I think, Humboldt and others get grants. And of course, our supervisors and McAllen and Williams and Sarah Duquette worked really hard to get this done, Deputy CEO. So now we get the task of implementation. So
we'll bring that back. I don't think we would have any information for our May 21st, but maybe a little bit later in this summer as we're figuring out the rollout, and Brent was just saying possibly in July. So we'll make sure to put that on our list of items we come back to you with.
Okay, thank you. And 2 other questions. Brent, you mentioned there was a place we could look at the application. Do you have like a website or how we could find that out? And Julia,
well, it's not, you can go to I can send you, Marilyn, where it is on the agenda for the board.
Yeah, we'll send out the link, the whole packet to the
link.
Entire commission, so you guys can all take a look at that. And it did go, I think it was February 25th that it went to the Board of Supervisors on their calendar if the general public would like to look as well.
It's an extensive application. It was quite something.
Okay. And then just, Julia, under matters from staff, you mentioned that would be coming up on the agenda. Will it be specific so members of the public would know that that's what, you know, and because usually it just says matters from staff, but it isn't, there aren't really items.
We would item it out there because we would likely want to bring some of our staff that is working on the implementation of it so we could give you some clear-cut answers on it. So it would be like an informational update with the ability for the commission to ask questions of us. So that would be under matters from staff. No action would be able to be taken on anything, but it would be an informational update.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else have any questions for Brent or Julia? Okay. Brent, did you have any other items under a director's report?
No, that concludes my discussion.
Okay, thank you very much. Then we'll go on to matters from public. The Mendocino County Planning Commission welcomes participation in commission meetings. This item is limited to matters under the jurisdiction of the commission that are not on the posted agenda and items which have not already been considered by the commission. No action will be taken. Individuals wishing to address the commission under public expression are welcome to do so via email in lieu of personal attendance at pbscommissions@mendocinocounty.org. All correspondence received will be made available under its respective item at https://www.mendocinocounty.org/government/planning-building-services/planning-commission. So with that, we'll take a 5-minute break for any comments that may come in, and then we will resume at, let's see, 9:23.
Excellent. Thank you. I believe that's been 5 minutes now at this point.
Okay, have we had any comments that have been received?
I have not received any comments.
Okay, thank you. Then we will go on to the consent calendar, of which there is no item. And then we will begin with our regular calendar, case UR 2019-0001. This is for the Wildwood Campground. It was continued from April 16th, 2020. I'd like to kind of go over the procedures of how we will be operating with this item. We'll have the staff presentation and then any questions from the commission for staff, then the applicant presentation. Then the commission and staff will note any correspondence or telephone calls received. Then we will go into public input, and any items that have been presented will be presented from staff to the commissioners with, well, there is no limit because you have the limit of about 3 minutes. And then there'll be, staff will present the final reports. Then there'll be any questions from the commission, and we will rotate, and I'll call on each commission member separately. And then we'll close the public hearing and then invite a motion and a second. So with that, we'll go on to the staff presentation.
Thank you, Juliana Cherry, planner with Mendocino County Planning and Building Services. I'm delighted to present to you a proposal to extend an existing use permit for Wildwood Campground located on Highway 20, just outside of the city limits of the city of Fort Bragg. I'd like to start with a housekeeping item. This is a continued item, and I noticed yesterday reviewing the resolution that in a couple of instances it refers to the April 16th date, and I just would like to, as a housekeeping item, say that the April 16th date when it's referenced most likely should be changed to May 7th, 2020, which is today's date. There are public comments that have been coming in over the last week, and I believe 10 public comments have been posted online at this point, and I believe they've all been shared with the planning commissioners. Staff prepared 2 memos, and I will go over them during my presentation. So to begin, this is a request to extend the expiration date of a use permit U3072, which allows for campground transient habitation consisting of 73 campsites, 1 park manager's facility, office, and 2 restroom and shower facilities. The current expiration date is June 1st, 2019. Staff recommends a 5-year extension of the expiration date. In the future and prior to requesting additional extensions, the property owner may either demonstrate compliance with our campground land use, which requires, it has a transient type of limitation where people can stay at the campground for 30 days or less, a less than monthly basis. Or they can file to request for a general plan amendment, zoning district amendment, and use permit that would allow longer occupancies, such as a mobile home park. Okay. So the use permit was originally approved in 1973 with a 20-year extension, and then in 1993, a second 20-year extension was granted. In 2013, the property owner applied to extend the use permit again, and the Planning Commission took action on that request about 18 months ago. At that time, staff was recommending a 5-year extension because there were several activities occurring at the property of concern to staff, and we wanted to give the property owner every opportunity to resolve those things prior to considering a longer extension of the use permit. The action that the Planning Commission took had several benchmark dates, and some of the many of the activities that were occurring on site have been resolved. All of the violations that had been opened have been resolved on site. So the applicant applied for another extension, and we talked with them, and one of the there are a couple of lingering things that the applicant is really working hard to find a path forward on, because of the 73 campsites, 54 of them, 45 to 54 of them have long-term occupancies, which is in conflict with our code. So the general plan amendment option is one way that the property owner could provide for affordable units here on the coast, and also satisfy our local zoning and zoning regulations and general plan goals and policies. So I'd like to just briefly go over the capacity of the campground. The use permit has always allowed for 73 campsites, and there is sufficient capacity for 45 of those campsites to have hookups, say to the on-site septic, and there is also on-site groundwater. There are additionally 28 campsites that are allowed that would not have hookups, and those we consider like tent sites or water only sites. Since the Planning Commission's last action, the property owner has completed permits for septic improvements at the property. Over the last 5 years or more, there has been some damage to the existing septic, some repairs needed to be done. And the property owner now has, I believe, basically the campground operates on 2 septic systems. One has a capacity of 2,900 gallons per day, and another one has the capacity of 3,100 gallons per day. And that is a sufficient amount of capacity for the 73 campsites that has been allowed over these last 50 years at Wildwood. There's other septic on site that serves some more remote located campsites, but suffice to say there's sufficient capacity for the number of campsites. So staff is recommending a 5-year extension, again, concluding on June 1st, 2024. This is condition 1 in the staff report. And this recommendation is really intended to support the property owner as they seek to comply with our local regulations, adopted conditions, and state licensing requirements. The property owner at this time, over these 5 years, could apply to renew or extend the major use permit again when the term concludes. They also have indicated to me that they intend to apply for a general plan amendment so that they can operate a mobile home park at this location in addition to the campground. In the staff report on pages 5 through 7 or so, I talk about the previous conditions that were adopted about 1.5 years ago by the Planning Commission, and how the property owner has satisfied many of those conditions. Staff, those conditions that have been satisfied and were associated with violations, we're recommending that those conditions not continue with the extension of the use permit as the issues have been resolved. Some of the other conditions that were adopted had benchmark dates, and so we're just recommending some clarifications to those conditions so that the property owner continues to comply with them, but that the benchmark dates aren't out of date. So on pages 6 and 7, for example, on conditions 2 and 12, 73 campsites are allowed, including 45 sites with hookups. The property owner currently hookups 54 sites, which is 9 more than what the use permit allows for. The capacity that with the repairs and the additional capacity that's been added, we've worked very closely with the property owner and with environmental health, and the capacity is sufficient for the 73 campsites and the 45 hookups. As I mentioned, lodging, the length of lodging has been an outstanding issue for some time at the property. And we are encouraging the property owner to look at if they want to continue having lodging on a more than monthly basis, that they look at like a mobile home park or a general plan amendment to allow for those kinds of occupancies. When I've been to the site this year, one of the requirements is that all vehicles be registered with the DMV, and that's because over those 5 or 6 years that I've been going to Wildwood, I've seen many vehicles that do not have current vehicle registration, and this includes RVs. I've also seen them with tremendous disrepair, perhaps not even having tires, so they wouldn't even be eligible to be operational and ready for the road. And yet this is a campground where RVs come and go, and so having RVs and vehicles that are registered with the DMV gives assurance that these vehicles can come and go from the property. In January and other times this year when I've been to Wildwood, I have seen visible improvement regarding vehicle registration, and the vehicles generally looked as if they were road ready. One of the conditions that was adopted by the Planning Commission had to do with on-site storage of vehicles. And that really related to the number of vehicles on site that really were in great disrepair and not being used, and just rather being stockpiled on the property. And in one instance, a vehicle had been buried on the site, which was a source of violation. Again, those violations have been resolved, and the debris has been removed at tremendous cost to the property owner, and the site, the campground is looking much better. So the conditions that were adopted allowed for one travel trailer or camper to be stored on site. And when I was there last, I counted 5 stored campers, 1 abandoned sedan, and 1 stored boat. So this is much better than what I have seen over the last 6 years, but still an area of concern that staff has. Another condition, condition 19, requires, and this it comes from our county codes, that campsites be a dust-free, mud-free campsite. And especially those with RVs, the surface could be, we had recommended laid with gravel. The property owner has some expense, had the internal road that goes around the campground paved with asphalt this year, which is a huge improvement to sources of dust in the campground. He's also laid gravel around the campsites, but the RVs themselves have not been removed. And so even though there is gravel in and amongst the campsites, when I've been there, they've still been rather muddy because it was during our rainy season. And so I have condition 19 has been revised somewhat to really require the property owner to provide that dust-free and mud-free campsite. Housing and Community Development does provide a license, a permit to operate to the campground. And the permit to operate in part is based on the use permit, the county action to allow camping at this site. Housing and Community Development can send out someone to inspect the campground to make sure that the campground is operating in conformance with state regulations. We had asked that the property owner demonstrate that these inspections are occurring. And while they have been happening, we have not been notified of the inspections or the findings that the inspector made. We're recommending a condition that would encourage the property owner to be more communicative about when the state is on site and what their findings are. I'd like to just restate that the violations that had been identified, including the burying of vehicles on site, the burning of debris, and have been resolved, as well as it seems of late, the septic system capacity has been inspected. I think just a week or so ago, the final permit was issued for the improvements on the septic system. And so the existing system operates now at a capacity that's appropriate for the number of campsites. We do have development standards for campsites, and I do go over that on pages 7 and 8 of the staff report. Excuse me. And then I do make some comments about the types of conditions that we're recommending that the Planning Commission adopt. And they're very similar to what they adopted about a year and a half ago. I'd like to bring your attention to one of the 2 memos that staff prepared, because in reviewing the report, I felt that some clarifications were needed. I met with the applicant in March in preparation for the April meeting and went over the conditions. And one of the comments that the applicant had made in regards to condition 10 was that it was unclear to them who they should be reporting to. And so staff is recommending some clarifications to condition 10 that this is about the existing septic system, and we're asking to be informed of the maintenance and the ongoing activities on a regular basis, because the septic system has always operated just at the edge of capacity, and sometimes over the last 5 years that capacity has been exceeded and it hasn't functioned very well. So we want to work closely with the property owner to know that the septic capacity is sufficient. So the clarification that staff is recommending is just identifying the location and the phone number that the property owner would contact in regards to letting the county know how the septic system is being maintained and that monthly reporting requirement. And then condition 21, we're also recommending it could be clarified. We're asking that the property owner demonstrate that the state has inspected a campground annually. And the reason we're asking for that is, unlike mobile home parks, campgrounds are not required by the state to have inspections. Mobile home parks actually pay a fee to have an annual inspection. Campgrounds is more of a volunteer participation. So by condition, we're asking that the property owner request that the state come out once a year and look at their campground to assure the county that it is operating in conformance with state regulations. There's no particular requirement what date or what month that the campground, that the state come out and inspect the campgrounds. The requirement is that the property owner demonstrate that once a year this inspection from Housing and Community Development occur. The other memo that staff prepared had to do with the land use, and as I've mentioned, a lot of staff's recommendation has to do with the willingness of the property owner to apply for a general plan amendment so that they can provide for long-term housing at this site. And in the staff report that was published, I had incorrectly described what would be the appropriate change in general plan and zoning. Excuse me. Just one moment. So I'm sorry, I coughed. So the recommendation is that the property owner, if they wanted to do long-term occupancies at the property, that they consider applying to change the general plan designation to rural community, and similarly the zoning district to rural community, and that's covered under the second memo that I'd written. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And I'm also happy if you'd like to see some images that were recently taken at the campground or would like to go over any exhibits, I'm more than happy to put them up on the screen. That concludes my presentation.
And if I may, I just want to add, because thank you for that presentation, Juliana, very well done. And I just want to quickly run through the date changes that Juliana was discussing for in the resolution, and just so the commission is aware where those changes would be, as is the general public. So the first change would be at the top of the resolution, which it would change from April 16th to May 7th. And then there would also be a change in the date in the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th whereas clauses, which are at the bottom of the last 4 whereas clauses at the bottom of page 1 on the resolution. And then additionally on page 3 of the resolution, which is Exhibit A, containing the conditions, at the very top in the header of that, it would be changed to May 7th, 2020. And that's it. So we can go ahead and go back to any questions from the commission.
I had a question.
Go ahead, Manon.
First of all, we refer to if they want to have permanent habitation. My understanding is this place has been in permanent habitation for well on 10 years. So I am wondering if our low-income housing set-asides are helping this situation in any way. That would be one question. And the other is, what are the fees for all these state inspections and stuff? That's it.
Attempted answering, or excuse me, think now you can hear me. I will try to take an attempt at answering that. So I'm not sure that we are aware of what the state may charge for any sort of inspection fee, nor would we necessarily have control over what they charge, but perhaps Juliana may be aware, which I'll let her chime in on that. But to answer the other question about the housing and the low-income housing, I don't think that there's necessarily, and I think Madeline, you phrased that as an offset in terms of it, and I don't think that there's anything really that is applicable for that at this time on here. I mean, of course, if the applicant came through, did a general plan amendment, a rezone, and then the use permit to become a mobile home park, there might be the opportunity for that housing to be considered as low income in relation to how our housing element and the compliance with our housing element requirements and RENA numbers. But, you know, I don't think necessarily there's an offset with this application.
And Commissioner Holkamp, this, if I could speak to the board on this, Brent Schultz, Planning and Building Service Director, that would not qualify for, I built a lot of affordable housing. It would not qualify for affordable housing.
So, and then I think I don't know if Juliana, if you have any knowledge of what fees may be charged by HCD?
I learned of the process about 5 years ago from the inspector at that time, and I understood that the fee for a mobile home park is $40, and I don't know if 6 years ago that was $40 per mobile home unit or $40 per campground. And I do not know what the fee would be for a campground, but perhaps the applicant could share with us, as he's recently had HCD out. He wanted to have the number of campsites confirmed, as he wants to increase his permit to operate to be more than what it currently is.
Thank you. That's quite a reasonable fee.
And I think at this point, rather than going to the applicant, we'll let him address that under his comments. Julia, I had a couple of questions I think we talked about item 21, the condition being changed during our discussion yesterday. The reading being a little bit clearer. I was struggling with, I'm sorry, on the first page of the memorandum. Well, they're both dated April 16th, but this is an item 21, the recommended condition. It was a little unclear to me, and I think we were looking at changing it to maybe beginning on January 1st, 2021, and annually, the property owner shall demonstrate, et cetera, et cetera. Could you clarify that for me, Juliana? Or
Yes,
or
so we could go either direction, whichever is for the benefit of the commission. I mean, whichever your preference would be, we'd be more than happy to, if you'd like to switch that so it says beginning and then annually from there, we'd be more than happy to make that switch. But we would just want that to be part of the motion made by the commission when we get to that portion of the meeting.
Okay, I see what's up on the screen, but I'm not sure. I guess I'm unmuted. So personally, I would like to have it read beginning on January 1st, 2021, and annually, comma, the property owner. How do the other commissioners feel about that?
And annually thereafter.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that. Is staff okay with that?
Yes, that seems completely sufficient.
I'm good with that.
So the condition would then be revised to read, condition 21 would say beginning on January 1, 2021, and annually thereafter, and then would continue with saying the property owner shall demonstrate to the Director of Planning and Building, and keep going.
Right. Can I make a comment on that? Does HCD give the county a staff report after every annual visit so that we keep it in our file for this project?
If you see the language that Staff Planner Cherry was adding there, it would require that a copy of those reports be filed with Planning and Building.
Okay, thank you.
If I may, through the chair, the HCD, it's at their discretion that they send us a copy. The current inspector does not inform the county that he's going to the site or what his findings are. Previous inspectors have been willing to coordinate doing the site visit with planning staff and have shared all of their reports with planning staff. So it's really putting the burden on the property owner allows that continuity of information and puts the responsibility on the property owner to share it with the county.
Thank you. I had a couple other questions, Juliana, on the staff report, page 6. You alluded to the resolution adopted conditions, the first one being condition 2 and 12. And you mentioned that there were 73 campsites allowed, including 45 sites without hookups. And then you mentioned the status, but I wasn't really clear about what was being done about the additional 2 campsites and 9 that were with hookups that apparently aren't. So perhaps you could use that.
So I think I understand your question. You're asking about the capacity of the campground or the number of sites?
Well, in that condition, item 2 on page 6, it the number of sites, but also the sites with hookups, and there's 2 additional campsites operating that apparently aren't allowed, and then 9 additional sites with hookups that aren't allowed, if I read that correctly.
Right. If I can figure out again how to screen share. So here is a table from the staff report that shows the capacity of the campground, and the use permit you can see on the second column on the left allows for 75 campsites, 45 with hookups.
73, mine says. Oh, I see.
Are we on page 6 of
So
the staff report under?
Right. So
Right.
right.
Adopted conditions.
I'm sorry. Could you say that again? I apologize.
That's okay. On page 6, the table 5, compliance with PC 2018-0034 resolution adopted conditions. And you mentioned that first item, condition 2 and 12, that there were as it reads, the requirement summarizes 72 campsites allowed, but the status as of January 2020, there were 75 operating, as well as 45 sites are allowed with hookups, but the status on January 2020 says 54 sites with hookups are there. So I wasn't really clear if they were in violation by the 2 extra campsites and the 9 extra sites with hookups.
Right, so they do operate more campsites than the use permit allows. And the total number of sites that connect to the septic does exceed the number that is allowed. The way we calculate the number of sites is a site with a hookup is allowed 100 gallons per day allotted. That is how the permit was calculated. And then on sites without hookups are allotted 50 gallons per day. Right now, the septic is distributed across basically 3 different areas or systems. There are 2 campsites that are separated from the campground that are on their own septic system, and those are occupied full-time by the property owner. And one of the campground managers, the property owner's daughter, Kay Ekstrom. And then the campsite generally has 54 campsites attached to the septic system, where the use permit limits it to 45. So he is operating more campsites than what the use permit allows for, and there are more campsites connected to the system than what the use permit allows for, and also what the septic permit capacity would allow for.
And if I may, Julia Acker-Krog, Chief Planner, I would want to draw the Commission's attention to the conditions of approval. And we have both condition number 2, which specifies what the maximum number of campsites are that are permitted at the site, as well as the number that are allowed to have hookups. And that is also reflected, at least the portion that discussed how many can have septic hookups is also included in condition 11 of the resolution. So that's page 5 of the resolution for condition 11 and page 3 for condition 2 of the resolution.
I have a question about that. Is it possible to attach a timeline to compliance for those 2 issues? Because I know 18 months ago when we heard this, we had this same conversation, and although it looks like improvements have been made in moving towards greater compliance, I'm a little concerned that it appears that no effort was made to come into compliance with both the number of campsites and also the number of sites with septic hookups. And I would hate to wait basically that other 4 years just to find out that they're not in compliance. And I'm wondering if we can add a timeline to those conditions, something that seems reasonable to basically decommission those sites, 6 months, 9 months, something like that, just so that we can see that the applicant is acting in good faith. And that should also help the issue with the septic system, which has been described as operating tenuously near capacity.
So this is Julia Acker-Krog, and I agree, Commissioner Purnell. I think we could certainly add a condition or language within the conditions to require that the campsites be brought into conformity with the allotment that's allowed underneath the use permit. And we would really look to the direction from the Commission here as to what that time frame would be that you feel is reasonable for that compliance. And it may also be wanting to discuss that with the applicant to see what he feels would be reasonable for him to comply, and because that would likely mean, a process of having to remove people out of the facility, which may take a bit of time.
Yeah, and I agree, and I think that's what I was alluding to when Commissioner Purnell addressed that it seems this has been ongoing, and again, there have been a lot of improvements there. However, I share the same concern that this doesn't seem to be addressed, especially in view of the septics being almost at full capacity. So when we go into the applicant's presentation, perhaps we could ask the applicant about an appropriate timeline for that.
Is this when we should be discussing other conditions as well, or would you like to save that for after the applicant?
Yeah, if you have a condition to address, Commissioner Holkamp, I think now would be an appropriate time.
Well, it did seem that there was a number of complaints about heavy machinery operating at late night hours and stuff, and it did seem to me like we needed a condition about that. And I did not find one in there. And maybe that work's all done, I don't know, but it does seem like in the public comment letters that there was a number of references to heavy machinery operating until midnight.
I did pick up on that too, and I felt there should be perhaps at sunset, which of course changes throughout the year, for both lighting and machinery operation. And I agree. I think perhaps there should be a condition for that, and perhaps we could address that to staff if they have any comments.
Sure, this is Julia Acker-Krog, and so we could all, of course, we are more than happy to draft up language for a condition about noise and hours of operation in terms of operating heavy equipment. But I do want to note there is, and this is a standard condition on all of our projects, we have condition of approval number 2, which talks about that the use and occupancy of the premises shall be established and maintained in conformance with the provisions of Title 20 of Mendocino County Code, unless modified by conditions of the major use permit. So that would mean that the property at all times is subject to the criteria within Mendocino County Code related to exterior noise limitations, which includes limiting when you exceed those noise thresholds, and is particularly limited in the nighttime hours. So if the commission would like, I'd be more than happy to work and draft up a condition that would make sure that that is spelled out verbatim. But I do believe it is captured in the conditions of approval number 2. You know, we would really look to your direction if you'd like to add a more specific condition to address that.
I just feel like since we have always had condition 2 and it hasn't been effective, maybe we need the spelling out.
Sure, well, we can, I'll work on some language then to present maybe after the applicant's statement. So that way, I'll see what other comments we may have, but it might be adding a few conditions, so.
Right, and we have a break for public comment, right? So that would be an opportunity to do that.
Exactly.
I have a question when it's appropriate.
Could I just address this one more time? My recommendation would be at sunset, Julia, if you're going to be writing additional condition. Would that be appropriate?
This is Greg. I think normally in a commercial operation, their hours of operation would be from, I believe, 8 o'clock till 5 o'clock. I wonder if we shouldn't mimic that.
What we have for our exterior noise, excuse me, sorry, and now I'm unmuted. I would like to go look at our exterior noise limit standards. I believe typically we allow the start of higher noise levels at 7 a.m., especially for construction related activities. But I'll have to double check within our ordinance to make sure that we're not, and you can always be more restrictive than the ordinance for this particular site, but we can't necessarily be more permissive. So I think that I'll look what we have and then present a couple options for the commission.
And will that be for both beginning and ending in the afternoon or evening, whatever? So you'll look at both the before, or when they can open and when they must quit. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. And Diana, I'm sorry, would you like to go ahead and
Yeah, I had a question, you know, and this is looking more on an overview. And Juliana, maybe you can answer this, is if this applicant wants to go for a general plan amendment and make it into a mobile home park, will they have the capability of sewer hookups for a mobile home park, or is that a pipe dream? And the next question is, who is their consultant, may I ask, for their environmental health septic reports, etc.?
Thank you for that question, if I may, through the chair. The city sewer does not extend to this property, so they use on-site septic. And there are, I think, 4 or 5 total septic permits. There are 3 septic systems. One serves 2 campsites exclusively, and the other septic systems serve the campground. The septic design is currently Carl Ritteman and Associates are the firm that is working with the property owner to finalize all of the permits that they have on file.
But because if they were to go for a general plan amendment, and if they were to make all, those extra campsites into long-term basic mobile home park sites, hookups, right? Do you think has that ever been flushed out? Would they have the septic capacity to do that, possibly?
I'm sorry, I heard the question and I didn't answer it. I apologize. I want to share with you a picture of the soils for the site, if I can. So here, the dark green color, soil type 199, is basically the plateau. And all the campgrounds are in this plateau area. The lighter shade greens of the campground is entirely slope and very steep. Mm-hmm. The septic is really located currently in the most optimal location. I understand that while there is a large field area in the campground towards the southern portion of the property, these soil types are more challenging for septic and the percolation of the effluent. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking at environmental health, who's here with me, and I'm explaining this well. So he may be able to demonstrate that he can increase his septic capacity, but at this point, we're not assured that that is going to be possible for the property owner.
And that would probably, if it's not, the property owner would probably have to limit the amount of long-term hookups, and even if they did a mobile home park, possibly.
Right.
And then it becomes a feasibility issue for the general plan amendment, right, going forward. I think. Right. Okay, thank you.
Right. At this point, we have about 31 plus 29, so that's about 66,000 gallon per day capacity. And I don't know that he's going to be able to increase that capacity very much. So it could be that the number of campsites with hookups are reduced to allow for the permanent occupancy, the capacity for a more permanent occupancy.
Thank you.
Sure.
Are there any other questions regarding sewer hookups for our septic capacity for Juliana from any other commissioners? Okay, seeing none, if you wouldn't mind, Juliana, I'd like to go back onto page 8 of the staff report. It's probably not that big of a deal, but under table 6, item 12, it states all utilities shall be placed underground for the standards. but the only utility that's underground, obviously, is a septic. And I wondered about the other electricity and perhaps communication or TV, how that is being addressed, or if it is being addressed.
That is a good question. I have been to the site, and I actually was a little surprised with today's access to cellular technology. I was surprised 6 years ago that I would see telephone wires going to individual campsites. I just hadn't seen that at any campground I had been to before. So some utilities do, like there are, of course, there are electrical hookups at each campsite, but some actually have phone hookups to their campsites. The campground follows Highway 20, and so the overhead utilities along Highway 20, like the electrical distribution lines, are not underground. I think that the property does conform with this standard to have all utilities placed underground. There is some poles that allow for the distribution of the electrical, but the septic is underground, and I believe at the campsites, the way that the electrical connects to the system is through an underground connection. And of course,
Okay,
water is underground.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So apparently the utilities, the electric utilities are above ground, are really the distribution lines from the utility company, but within the park, the rest of the utilities are underground. So that's kind of probably water, septic, and electric should be included as the underground. And I don't know how to address the phone lines, but I guess, do we need to address that, I guess is my question.
I saw the phone lines more of an indication of the permanency of people who live there. If I were camping, I don't know that I would set up a phone line to my campsite. And so that was the reason why I was surprised to see it. It seemed like a huge hurdle to go through for a camping. The first time I went there, I thought I didn't anticipate seeing permanent occupancy.
So are you saying you don't feel that needs to be addressed?
Well, I've been going to the campsite for 6 years now, and I think I've grown to understand the campground much more than I did when I went there the first time. And the conditions at the campground have substantially improved over the last 2 years compared to where it was 6 years ago. We could request that the telephone lines be removed from the campsites if you'd like, or we could discuss whether telephone lines to campsites is appropriate for campgrounds.
And perhaps, again, under the applicant's presentation, we could address that with him as well at that time. And I had another question under the conditions, and that would be on page 5, campground occupancy and capacity, item 11C. And that also is in relation to item 13. So I'm going to discuss both of those together. Item 11C says a provision of lodging services shall be on a less than monthly basis, which we understand there are some permanents there that probably do pay on a monthly basis. And then on item 13, it says, when applicable, the property owner shall comply with Chapter 520 Uniform Transit Occupancy Tax and Chapter 6.04 Business License Chapter of the Mendocino County Code. I assume what that means is the property owner should be paying transit occupancy tax on those with less than 30 days, which if that's all that, the only occupants that are there are supposed to be there for less than 30 days, transit occupancy tax should be being paid. Am I correct on that? And is it being paid?
So On item 11, that comes directly from our code. We're asking under condition 11 that the property owner comply with our local codes regarding less than a monthly basis. On condition number 13, when the Planning Commission last considered the extension, which was about 18 months ago or 24 months ago, there was an initiative on the ballot to have campgrounds pay TOT. That initiative, I don't believe, passed. So at the time, the commission adopted this condition. We wrote when applicable because we were thinking perhaps that initiative would have passed, and it hasn't. But they are required to maintain a business license, and if ever we do adopt regulations requiring campgrounds to pay TOT, we would expect the campground to contribute. At this time, there is not a requirement for campgrounds to pay TOT.
Through the chair, this is Deputy County Counsel Matthew Kudrowski. I want to clarify that last point. There was a campground TOT initiative that was on the ballot this year that did pass. The one in 2018 did not. So I think the intent of that language is merely, that's what the when applicable clause is there for. While this site's complicated in terms of long-term camping versus not, I think the intent would be if there are people who are there on a transient basis, those sites would be required to pay TOT.
Okay, thank you, Matt. That does help. It's a struggle, but because again, with the low-income housing that is needed on the coast and trying to address that, I hate to see the applicant having to pay additional taxes, but if that has passed, then apparently that will be needed. And then I'd like to go on again on the conditions on page 6. I just really had a question on this item 23C as in Charles 1. It's addressing the campsite refuse bins. And this may be a question for the applicant, but it says campsite refuse bins shall be emptied on a daily basis. And I wondered if the owner had to do that, if a disposal service came in on a daily basis. I would think that'd be a little overkill, but I just wanted to clarify that, please, Juliana.
So this comes directly from state regulations regarding campgrounds. Campsites are supposed to have refuse bins in the campsite, and they are supposed to be emptied on a daily basis. The regulation does not state who should empty them. I have talked with the property owner about the refuse collection, and I also noticed that every campsite currently does have a refuse bin. I understand that they are emptied on a weekly basis by the staff who works at the campground. I would imagine if they're full or overflowing, perhaps they would make a decision to empty it sooner. There is one area where there is a large refuse bin where these individual campsite trash cans are emptied into. And I generally found that the debris and the collection of well-used items is significantly reduced at the Wildwood Campground this year when I've been out there.
Okay, thank you. I think that pretty much takes care of any questions I had. So I think we'll go on to the rest of the commissioners. Commissioner Holkamp, why don't we start with you? If you had any questions for staff, please.
No, I think I've covered my question.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Perkins, did you have any comments or questions for staff?
Yeah, I have a couple hopefully simple questions. The first one is on page 5 of the staff report where you list the referral agency responses. The line for the county sheriff's office is blank. I'm curious if we received any comment from the sheriff's office about this application.
Thank you for that question. Through the chair, if I may, over the years that I've been working on making recommendations regarding this, it has been my initiative to contact the Sheriff's Department for data. In preparing this particular recommendation to extend the use permit, I did not contact the Sheriff's Department for updates on the frequency of calls to the campground. When I contacted them last, I would say it was 2 years ago, and there had been a demonstrated decrease in the number of calls, and I just felt it wasn't warranted I decided not to contact the Sheriff's Department in preparing this staff report.
Okay, thank you. And the other question that I had was, I'm not sure if you had a conversation with county code enforcement. Whether it's true or not, it's the viewpoint of a lot of people locally here that many of the abandoned trailers along Highway 20 originate from Wildwood Campground. Again, I'm not sure if that's the case or not. So I'm curious if the county's vehicle abatement folks and code enforcement have any insight onto these trailers, because I know it's kind of a big issue along Highway 20. And again, the perception is that Wildwood's responsible for some of it.
Thank you for that question. And again, through the chair, if I may, when I've been out there, I've really tried hard to photograph all of the vehicles that I see on site, in part to document whether or not they are registered with the DMV. I do see that there are vehicles abandoned along Highway 20. There is no way for the county to determine whether or not those vehicles do come from Wildwood Campground, or it's just a popular location for people to drop off vehicles. I have seen that claim as well. So cars like sedans certainly can, the county does have funds for cleaning and removing those, but things like RVs, my understanding from talking with code enforcement staff is that the RVs are not eligible for that abatement program the way that cars like sedans would be.
Okay, and I guess.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask a question about that point. So does whoever maintains Highway 20 have to bear the cost of abatement of those RVs?
I would need assistance answering that question. I do not know who the responsible party would be.
So this is Julia Acker-Krog, Chief Planner. What we'll do is, if we keep going forward with the meeting, we'll go through the applicant statement. We'll get some clarifying answers from our code enforcement staff here in our Ukiah office, and we'll report back to the commission after you've gone through the applicant statement and public comment.
Okay, thank you. Scott, did you have any other additional comments or questions?
Yeah, I guess what this gets at is recommended special condition 17B, abandoned vehicles shall be immediately removed from the property. I'm not sure if adding language that says, legally removed from the property is really going to make a big difference, but I've been thinking about this, for a few days now about how to, ensure, and because the public comment letters indicate that these vehicles and trailers may be disposed of, on neighboring properties. So I was wondering and I'm hoping that maybe staff can think about if there's any creative ways to do this, that the campsite manager, maintains a log of vehicles on site and active registration to be available for review by PBS or submitted to PBS, just to kind of, encourage enforcement of this special condition. So I don't know what we can ask. I haven't come up with a very elegant solution in my thoughts, but I'm wondering if staff has any ideas of how we can say more than, they shall be removed in a legal manner. How can we maybe just have some sort of record keeping from the applicant about vehicles on site, and if they are removed, how they're removed, maybe showing receipts that they were legally removed in a responsible manner. But I understand that a lot of times that might be on the owner of the vehicle more than the campsite. So I don't have a solution, but I'm looking for one if anybody has any good ideas.
Perhaps staff can look at that and make a recommendation later in the meeting.
Okay, thank you. I think you have a very good point, Scott, and I'd like to see that addressed too. And just while we're kind of on that subject, and it kind of ties in with your comments, there were a couple of letters from property owners on Shangri-La about beer bottles and wine bottles and perhaps drug problems going on over there. And I understand that Shangri-La is a private drive, so I would believe it would be up to the property owners there to address that. I'm not sure how, perhaps putting up a gate or something. And I don't know how many property owners are on Shangri-La Drive, but I just kind of wanted to mention that as well. And I don't know how that could be policed either, other than, calling the sheriff and that sort of thing. But just kind of addressing that item. Okay, so I think we are down to Commissioner Wiedemann. Did you have any comments or questions?
I'm seeing a head shake no. And yes.
I don't think she's on my screen right now, so then we'll go on to.
I'll answer that. No, I don't have any. I got my questions answered. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Diana. We'll go on then to Commissioner Purnell.
Okay, thank you. And Juliana, I wanted to compliment you on a great report. And also, it's clear that you've been working with the applicant to find solutions here. This is a complicated case, and it seems like we've got something really good to work with here with your staff report and memo. So I wanted to acknowledge that. I did have a question about table A, which is on the first memo. And I didn't see in that table the current land use classification and zoning district, which I believe is upland residential zoning and the RMR 40 land use classification. And I just wanted to see if there was a reason why that wasn't in there, and then double check that my own evaluation of allowed uses is correct, that under the current zoning and land use, that transient habitation is allowable by a major use permit, but that the mobile home park is not allowed. Am I correct? I think you're on mute.
There we go. When you're screen sharing, the mic button is harder for me to locate. I apologize. Right, so I did not include the upland residential because mobile home parks are not allowed in the district that is currently assigned to this property. So I was speculating what districts would be appropriate for the long-term occupancies like a mobile home park.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for that. And on the topic of the law enforcement activity log, which I know we saw 18 months ago, and that was really helpful in seeing that there was an improvement in the calls going into 911 for this property. And I understand that that's not available today, but and I'm also understanding from your reporting here that improvements have continued to have been made, which is wonderful. But I did want to get some clarification that came in through some of the public comment letters that show illegal dumping and also illegal sewage dump. And it says in the past, but I just wanted to clarify that this is not a current concern or condition.
So the effluent on the property is much better managed than it has been managed previously. The last 12 months, the property owner has completed all of the necessary capacity improvements to sufficiently handle the effluent for the number of campsites that are there. Previous years that I've been to the site, the campground has really shown that it was operating above the capacity that it had. And there was about a 2-year period where the capacity was significantly diminished because of an erosion event on the property, which eliminated access to one of the septic systems until the repair was completed. So no, I have not myself seen effluent on the property, and in consulting with environmental health, who's here in the office with me, the effluent is, the septic system is operating appropriately at this time.
Okay, thank you. And as for the pictures that we received from a neighbor about the illegal dumping and illegal sewage dump on neighboring properties that came from Wildwood, do we know if that's a current situation or if those situations have been rectified?
There's one property owner that joins that we have not been able to determine the complaint or the extent of the complaint. There is water that flows towards the campground and is right adjacent to one of the leach fields. So when that leach field operates above capacity and is overwhelmed, there is the possibility that that effluent might flow towards this drainage ditch that is wet. The last time I was at the campground and I was there with environmental health, there was not effluent flowing from the leach field towards the drainage ditch. The drainage ditch is off-site and it is wet. It did have standing water when I was there with environmental health. And perhaps that is the source of that complaint. I don't think that there's an open violation about effluent being dumped on other property. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Okay, I think it does. Thank you.
May I just make a comment here, Allison, if you don't mind?
Sure.
I was wondering if perhaps environmental health and planning and building could perhaps meet with the adjacent property owner as well as the applicant to review this, because I too had the concerns that the of one of the letters that came in, I believe that's from Jeremy Jason James, that I think it would be good if all of the parties met out there and determined where this open pit came from, what's in it, and that sort of thing. I guess I'm asking staff if that could be arranged.
So this is Julia Acker-Krog. So I think, typically we stay out of issues between property owners. That would be more of a civil matter for the two property owners to resolve amongst themselves. It's usually not staff's role to act as a liaison in that capacity. That's more of a civil matter between the two property owners about the question of where that effluent is coming from, or if there's some sort of issue related to that. The county would typically not be involved in that.
I just had a question.
Now I understand your comment, but we do have an applicant where it could be coming from the applicant. So I'm not sure how to address that. And Matt may have to, county council may have to address this with us. I'm not sure. And then Diane, I think you had something as well.
I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, to staff, the neighbor has the right to go to environmental health and register a complaint if they think there's effluent coming from a neighboring property. And at that case, in that case, I believe environmental health would have to pursue investigating it. Am I correct?
This is Christina Paulman with Environmental Health. So the situation is that there is runoff water coming through Wildwood and some ditches onto a neighboring area that has been excavated in order to kind of capture that runoff water. And above that is one leach field which was operating under capacity, so that during the winter months when it got really wet, there may have been effluent seeping out of those ditches and then getting passed on into that stagnant area that's holding water down there. Now that they have expanded the capacity of that field by installing a whole new field, that doesn't seem to be happening anymore. I asked Mr. Exum about this like pond that's down there and who had put it in, and according to him it was there before he was there, so it was a previous installation. You can ask him more about that. And it is legal to have to pass water onto a neighboring property, but from my knowledge, that then becomes a civil issue.
Okay, I appreciate the elaboration on this, and I've got just two more issues, and I'll wrap it up so we can move on to the next person here. In some of the public comment, including from the applicant, there was a request to strike condition number 14, and that is the condition about complying with transient habitation, which is sort of at the whole, that's the crux of the issue here, is that that's not compliant, but then we have a condition here saying that it needs to be compliant. And so it's a bit of the elephant in the room, and I'm curious to hear from staff if the county is not planning on enforcing condition number 14, should we just remove it, given that basically this property owner has essentially 4 years to make the transition to a mobile home park, if that's what they so choose? I mean, I think we have to make the decision, are we going to allow this or are we not going to allow it? But it gets kind of weird when we put a condition in there saying that they have to comply, but it's not going to be enforced. Does that make sense?
Does to me. I think it's an excellent point. So I guess we need to check with staff on that.
Julia Acker-Krog, I think my comment would be if the commission can't necessarily approve an extension of something, without including a condition that requires compliance with the land use. And that's been a challenge on this site, I think, throughout its operation, is that there's been the knowledge that this site was not being operated in conformance with the standards for a campground. And we've continually included that condition that it should be operated in conformance with the campground. I would have some serious concerns about removing that and basically saying it's okay for the owner to operate not in conformity with the zoning ordinance and the standards applicable for this site. So I think we acknowledge that we're seeking a long-term solution for this, but I would be concerned about deleting that, because then what's to say that the owner is not operating in conformance now if that's not stipulated within there?
Okay, thank you. That's helpful to understand the thinking behind that. Great. And then there's just one more quick thing, which is back to condition number 2, which is conformance with the 73 allowable campsites and the 45 sites with hookups. And I wanted to suggest a date for consideration by the commission, that it be the end of the calendar year, December 31st, 2020, that conformance with that be achieved. And that's it.
Perhaps you could address where you wanted to put that in that item, Allison.
If I may briefly, I actually have drafted up an additional condition for your consideration that I think that language would fit nicely within. And I would like to type that up on a revised redlined resolution and put it up on the screen probably after we go through applicant statement and such, so I get a little bit of time to draft that. But I do think we'll fit that language in nicely.
Okay, thank you. Anything else, Allison? Okay. Then we'll go on to Commissioner Nelson.
My questions have already been answered. Thank you.
Thank you. And am I correct that Commissioner Jacobson is not with us today?
That is correct. Commissioner Jacobson apologized for the late notice, but he was unable to attend the meeting today and did send an email to that effect.
Okay, thank you. Do we need a break before we hear from the applicant? Can I see? Yes.
Yes,
Okay,
please.
Okay.
Greatly
how about if-
appreciated.
10:45, please.
I have a comment.
Thank
to
you.
go get. I can't.
How long the break? 10 minutes?
About
Marilyn?
10:45, 8 minutes. is back. So if there's nothing else, no other questions from commissioners, we'll go on with the applicant. And thank you, Mr. Assume, for giving us the time to go through all the items. And I know there are some things in addition to your presentation that you would like to address.
Do we need to unmute Mr. Dixon?
Is the applicant available to speak with us?
I see that he's online, but his
Oh, there we go. Mr. Exum, there we are.
I got everybody but me.
It could be that video button down in the lower left. That's what Julia recommended for me, and then I was able to get on. Or perhaps the share screen.
Or the video, the camera.
Well, I lost the feed totally.
Mr. Exum, we can hear you. I'm not sure if you're able, can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I can't see anything.
Well, I think if you don't mind, I mean, there is the video that you can toggle on the bottom, but otherwise we can hear you loud and clear. So if you wouldn't mind doing your presentation just orally, I think we could keep going that way.
Well, all right, I'll go ahead and speak. My name is Lee Exum. I'm the owner of Wildwood Campground, and I have been discussing many of these issues that you people are discussing today, and I'm basically in agreement and want to work towards the general plan amendment or whatever changes are necessary. But I have two major issues that I would want to deal with, and then I will answer questions. This 30-day minimum stay for our customers. At the present, we have at least 50 of our sites occupied by families that have been here for years, some of them as much as 10 years. This was never an issue that we can find prior to our request for renewal of the use permit that was issued in 1973, and we asked for a renewal in 2013. During many months, the additional 26 sites are only partially used. Since our purchase of the park in 2006, the majority of our customers have been long-term residents who are elderly or on Social Security or low income who could not afford apartment rent in the area. I believe that we should be considered an asset for this area, for this type of people. Our managers over the years have learned to work with the needs of these people and with the agencies that provides their funds in the town of Fort Bragg. In discussions with planning, we learned that a general plan amendment and a new use permit will correct this problem, and that the planning department would assist us in filing for this. And that's what I'm hearing in this discussion today. Therefore, we are planning to file this for this change immediately. We understand that under California SB 35, this process could possibly be fast-tracked because we are providing help for the homeless, low income, and ask for a consideration of that in order to speed up the process. In the meantime, we are asking for an exemption to this condition until the above is done. That's the only way we can survive financially. Number two that I'll deal with is the number of sites. And this gets quite complicated, but let me listen through with me. And the number of sites with drains. I have owned and operated Wildwood since 2006. We have made many changes, repairs, and improvements over these years of continuous operation. For all major projects, we have obtained the necessary permits from county and state departments. This has included electrical, water, and sewer additions and/or repairs. Several times during these years, our annual state permit to operate has had different numbers of sites without any input from us. For the past several years, this number has been incorrect. When we applied and paid for our annual fees for our current permit from the state, we included a letter stating the correct number of sites and asked for a correction. When our permit arrived in October, it had not been corrected and no explanation was given. This also did not agree with the number listed by Mendocino County. Recently, I walked the park with the state inspector and counted all the sites with him. His report was 54 sites with drains in use now, 22 additional sites with no drains ready for use at any time. The state is issuing a new permit to operate with these numbers and types. Here is a history of the approval of these sites. We have researched all of our historical records and permits with the following findings. The number of sites with drains in use when we purchased this park in May of 2006 was 26 plus one mobile home office with drain. Number two, in 2010, a new permit to install a new system for 10 existing sites. This was engineered by Carl Ritterman Associates and installed by park employees. When completed and inspected, it was inspected and signed off by Mendocino Environmental Health. In 2011, 2012, a repair permit for parts of the old system and some additional sites provided for an additional 16 sites. This was built in 2 sections and consisted of 1 new leach field and also engineered for a second to be added later. The second one was begun in 2019 and not completed till March of this year because of inability to get some needed parts for it. In 2017, also a new leach field for 2 sites in an area of the park that used to be designated Phase 2. This was designed by Carl Ritterman, permitted and inspected and improved by Mendocino Environmental Health. This brings our total to 54 sites with drains. In additional, we have 16 dry sites with water at each site and 6 sites that are only 4/10. In the summer and holidays, we are using all of these sites. We have metered water usage record for the past 5 years or more that prove that in no months have we ever used more than 65 gallons per day per site for all the sites in this park. From these facts and for these reasons, we are asking that this permit allow these numbers. Also, since we are required to be inspected and report to County Environmental Health monthly, we will make any changes if found necessary. This last section of that was just put on last fall, and it's operating very well. But use of all these sites will be necessary for our continued operation and services to the present occupancies. And as to additional places on the park, we have 65 acres here. And we have an additional site that has already been checked and basically approved by our engineering firm of Carl Ritterman, so that we can put in additional systems if and when necessary. This should answer the questions regarding going to mobile homes. I don't know that we're going to mobile homes, but we want the 30-day thing. A couple other issues that has been brought up are really troubling. We do not dump old trailers out on Highway 20. We have had several issues where people tried to sneak in and dump an old trailer on us, and our security people caught them one night, one of them, and the next day I had to move it because it was on a road that blocked my neighbor. It wasn't on my road at all. So we've been trying to monitor this. As we speak, I've had somebody drag an old trailer in on the sites that we cleaned up over the 2 years ago complaints. One other statement in that respect, the man that was responsible for most of the problems of late night work is no longer here. He was killed in a motorcycle accident last fall. I have new staff, a new staff member that is doing a great job. He understands septic systems and all of these regulations I've gone over with him, and I am very happy that he's doing a great job for us. And in closing for right now, and then I'll answer any questions, our goal is to provide for these people that do not have all the blessings that some of the rest of us do. My wife and I ran nursing homes for most of our lives. And so I understand the needs of less affluent people. So I would appreciate the Planning Commission working with me, and I will work with Juliana and Christina for a continued improvement in this park. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Exum. And there were a few notes that I made during our discussion and items that the commission wanted. The first one I wanted to address, you mentioned that the maintenance person has now been replaced. You didn't really address the nighttime issue. I think you meant to, but it wasn't really clear on that. And we were looking at adding a condition for the lighting and the equipment operation between certain hours. Could you address that for me, please?
We have no need except in emergency or want to operate those kind of hours. That man was a problem. I won't go into, I'll answer questions about it if you want, but he was a problem from the day I bought this park. And I'm sorry the way he had to leave, but we're better off with the man I have now. And we're really working together to, we're not real close to neighbors. We got neighbors that keep trying to dump stuff in here on us. I have an easement road across this that goes to two of my neighbors back behind, three of them actually. And so I can't put a lock on that gate so that they come in and dump their garbage, and then I got to get rid of it. The other thing, as far as these old trailers and whatnot, the county makes no provision for disposal of those. So we have to destroy the trailers, put it in a drop box, and send it to the transfer station and pay about $1,000 each of any of these that are not usable anymore. We also have a cost of getting rid of the tires, and we're continually getting tires dumped in here. So we're going to, on this easement road, we are going to put in an electronic gate shortly. We have one of the pieces of property behind us, a new person bought it who is a state park ranger, and he's willing to work with us. And so is one of the other people that has been a problem. He's willing to work with us. And so we're going to try to put a stop to the use of that easement road by anybody but the ones that are supposed to.
Thank you, Mr. Exum. It sounds like you're doing a wonderful job of not only cleaning up some things, but also addressing issues that neighbors and other property owners have addressed. So we appreciate that. And a few other questions. One of the questions was the cost for the inspections that you need to do. I think one of the commissioners was asking that question, and staff didn't have an answer for that. Could you give us that information?
I have an answer. Okay.
Yes, that would be one.
I'm sorry I cut you.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
No, anytime I have a state inspector out, it costs me $192 every trip. And that's been going on for several years.
Okay, thank you. And I did have a question about the refuse bins. They're supposed to be, and I know that's been based on the reports that we've heard, they've been cleaned up a lot, but it did say that it was one day that they were to be cleaned daily. And I wondered, does staff do that, or do people bring their own to the refuse bins, or how is that taken care of?
My maintenance man walks the park each morning, and if there's bins that are full, the people are asked to take them to our trash pickup, or he does it for them. And so it's monitored on a daily basis. He also monitors, while I'm talking about him again, he's the one that's responsible for monitoring, and he's keeping accurate records of our septic systems and servicing them, which was not being done again because of this other man. And I'm not making excuses. I'm just stating the cold, hard facts that I've dealt with. And like I say, I'm very happy, and I'm very aware of the need to service and to monitor septic systems. Before I ever came here, I had installed a lot of septic systems. I lived in Paradise for years, which has no sewer system. But it is an issue that we feel we've more than compensated for. The last group of leach fields that we put in, the park was operating just at capacity before we put it in, but we put in about 600 feet of new leach field and new tanks and a whole new system, actually.
Okay, thank you. And there was also, I think I asked the question about the removal of overhead phone lines. I'm not sure if some of the people who live there still have landlines, but this was addressed where they were supposed to be underground. So I didn't know if those could be removed, or perhaps you could address that item as well.
Well, that's not my decision. That's the phone people's decision. I wish they weren't there too. But a lot of these people, that's the only way they can have a phone. I put in, among other things, since I've owned the park, we put in a whole brand new electrical underground system and refurbished the existing one that was here. And our water, we have 4 wells here on the site. We have about 15,000 gallons of storage, and all of those lines are buried. So I feel, other than the telephone line, which I don't have any control of, I tried to get them to put a telephone for me out here where I live, because I'm on one of the sites in question. I live in a motorhome, and they wanted me to pay for $5,000 to run a cable underneath the highway. And so I feel that that's the responsibility of the phone company, not me.
Okay, thank you. So it appears that there are residents there who have only landlines, and you may be one of them. Am I correct on that, Mr. Exum?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Those, I think, are the only questions or notes that I had on my notes. I think we'll go to each one of the commissioners now and see if they have any questions. We'll start with Commissioner Holkamp.
No.
Okay, Commissioner Perkins, do you have any questions for the applicant?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Thank you. And Commissioner Wiedemann?
I want to just get back to, I want to thank the owner for due diligence of working on improving the site with the infractions, etc. The issue of the 9 extra hookups, right? And what we're talking about, the 9 hookups, which is the 54 versus the 45. And I'm going to go back to staff for this question. Juliana, are you available, I'm hoping? Can you,
Yes.
the owner is saying, look, you know, we've always had, and I'm a little unclear. Are we removing 9 hookups that were recognized? Or did they, I want to say, did they add more hookups than the original use permit? And then the question is, do they have the capacity at this moment for septic to keep the 9 hookups? Thank you.
Okay, so I'd like to share with you a map that we've been working with that helps staff understand the septic capacity at the site. This shows all of the campgrounds. The area in blue is attached to one leach field with a capacity of 2,903 gallons per day. The area in yellow or orange has a capacity of 3,100 gallons per day. The areas that are not colored or are blue do not have direct connections to the septic system. They're either tent sites or water-only sites. And you'll see over to the right, there is campsite 70 and 71. These two are where the property owner lives, and they have their own septic system. So the capacity for the permits when they were issued were based on 100 gallons per day for a campsite with a drain. So for example, if you have 2,900 gallon per day, you could have 29 hookups to that leach field. And then, so we looked at that, and let's see if I can adjust this just a little bit. So there's one mobile home up here in the upper left-hand corner. There are 54 with drains. That would be 100 gallons per day, or 5,400 gallons per day demand on the system, or capacity allocated for the system. And then there are 21 that are not connected with drains, and the capacity allocated for that under the permit is 50 gallons per site per day. So that's a total of 76 sites. So here in the green, you have about 22 sites connected, where you could have up to 29 connected. And here in the yellow, you have 28 with drains. So the property owner can use the capacity of these 2 leach fields and distribute the connections so that he's optimizing the capacity of both systems. He can also shift as one system is overwhelmed, say during a rainy season, to using using additional capacity at the other system while the overwhelmed site dries out. Or it might,
it's hard plumbing. So.
Yeah, so it's you know, there's So the capacity as it's installed today is sufficient for the number of the 45 drains and the number of campsites that are allowed, which is 28 sites without drains and 45 sites with drains, for a total of 73 campsites.
Okay.
I'm a little unclear on these numbers because I'm hearing 73 and 76 and 75, but I understood you to say there were 76 total, and the applicant also mentioned that at one time. Could you address that, Juliana?
Right, so throughout the time that I've been working with the property owner, there have been more campsites than the use permit allows, and there have been more sites connected to the septic system than the septic system is allocated capacity. So we have a use permit that allows 73 sites. There are 75 total sites on the property. They're exceeding the use permit. The septic capacity allows for 45 sites, and there are 54 sites connected to the system.
So somehow Hello?
May I speak again to that? Am I muted?
No, you're not muted, but I think Commissioner Wiedemann had a comment first, if you don't mind, Mr. Exum.
All right.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a possibility that in the process, right, that if the owner is to increase capacity of the septic system, that could add 9 more hookups? Is there a way this, use permit can include that?
This is Julia Acker-Krog. So at this time, this application is not requesting a modification to add additional sites. This is solely the renewal of the previous entitlement. A modification to the use permit would have to be requested and processed, and we'd have to conduct a full evaluation on whether or not the site can actually be legally permitted for 9 additional connections. And I don't think we have that information in front of us today to be able to answer that sufficiently.
Thank you.
May I interrupt and comment?
Yes, please go ahead, Mr. Exum. It's a struggle with this on and off mute button, but yes, please go ahead.
I went through that, how we arrived at having that many sites, all of them permitted through the application process over the years. And so I'm in disagreement that they were installed without permits. The only ones that I don't have any records on is the 26 sites that were here when I came here, and I've never been able to find records on those. But we have totally taken those sites into consideration in the installation of our new 4 new leach field sites since I've been here. And we have the whole system interconnected to where we can transfer. If like one system gets overloaded, we can shut that system down or cut down some of the effluent going to it and shuffle it to another system. And they're in vastly different parts of the park, so they don't influence one end, doesn't influence the other one. So I feel that we've been operating with these 54 sites for a number of years, actually, without this additional leach field that we just put in over the last 12 months. And that vastly increased our ability for quite a bit more gallonage. The other thing with the engineering of these sites, the engineer, I don't know where the number of 50 and 100 came from, but the engineer always goes by what the ground will absorb, and he's got his own information on that. I'm not privy to it, but we carefully have always have dug deep holes to find out how far down the soil goes and all the stuff. I personally have done that for him. I know the man and I've worked with him, and I respect his knowledge, and I followed carefully what he designed and put it in.
So this is Christina Paulman from Environmental Health. The 100 gallons per day per site is what Mr. Exum's septic permits are based on. And those numbers come from studies that the EPA does, and it's an industry standard to use those numbers. The way we from Environmental Health look at those numbers is that one leach field area has a capacity of 2,900 gallons per day, and the other one has a capacity of 3,100 gallons per day. How he divides up those, between with drains and without drains doesn't matter to us. We just don't want those leach fields to exceed those numbers.
Well, under this conditions of this use permit, we will have to report to environmental health every 30 days. So we're monitoring these things on a weekly basis. We have been since we put in this new system. I'm more than happy to give written reports, and I have confidence in the man that is doing the work on them now. I didn't have before.
I think my concern is I would like to see staff with the same numbers as the applicant. And if I'm correct, in 2019 there were 54 sites with drains and water, 16 sites with water and no drain, 610 only, for a total of 76. And I understand, if I'm correct, that the park is only approved for a total of 73. So what I would like to see is that staff's numbers agree with the applicant's numbers, so that all of our numbers on this application and the report are all consistent. So I guess I'm addressing staff to discuss with Mr. Exum so that these numbers are all consistent.
Thank you. Oh, go ahead, Juliana.
Staff is recommending that the Planning Commission continue the campground capacity as it has always been under the use permit, 73 campsites. We're also recommending that the capacity of the system can support 45 campsites with drains and 28 without drains. If Mr. Exum has additional campsites that he would like to have, he needs to amend his use permit, and he needs to provide for additional capacity at the site.
And this is Julia Acker-Krog, Chief Planner. We could also, and so I hear your comments, Chair Ogle, and so if the commission so desired to, staff would require a continuance for this, but we could sit down with the applicant and fully vet over the numbers again. But I do agree with Staff Planner Cherry that we have it clear in our records of what we believe is authorized at the site. And that may not be in concert with what the applicant feels is authorized at the site. But if we wanted to try to reconcile and see what information the applicant has to try to see if for some reason our numbers are not correct, we would need to have a continuance to be able to address that.
For example, I do not see a site number 8.
There is no site number 8.
I'm gathering that, but I'm wondering if it's, but then we number on to 58, or no, 71. So I'm wondering if that's really 70, or, you know, what I think some work needs to get done on the numbers.
The number of actual sites are correct. Number 8 was done away with years ago, but the numbering was renumbered.
Oh, okay.
So the number of sites is correct. And the thing of it is, if we're not allowed this additional 9 sites with drains, then what are you going to do with those people that are living on those sites? You can force me to throw them out in the street, like, and that's where a lot of these type of people end up if they're not allowed to live here.
Chair Ogle, if I could address the commission on this. My understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, Julia, we have a use permit here that only allows 73 campsites, correct? Is that correct?
That is my understanding.
And then this is requesting an extension of this use permit. I don't believe we have authority to change and increase the number of because that's not what was applied for here.
I agree.
That would be a
modification.
A modification. He'd need to apply for that, show us all the information for that, and see if it could even be justified. And then bring it, whether it could be justified or not, bring it back to the commission in a separate item. I'd like to have the commission, if we could, focus on this. Should we extend this or not? And then we don't have the information or anything to even do that right now. Other than we do know this, right? The use permit says 73. So that's our number. We can't change that with this application.
I would agree to the 73 if you'll approve it with the 54 sites with drains. I've got 5 dry sites that I can eliminate real easy.
So I think, you know, it, again, to the director's point, is that the way that the conditions and the records that we have, we can't necessarily authorize an increase in the number of connections, whether it's the number of campsites or the number allowed to be hooked up to the septic, without doing an additional review and having a modification process to this permit.
So does the owner want that, or a modification? I mean, are we gonna, I'm just, you know, can we get rid of the map?
Yeah.
Go back. Thank you.
Let me answer that question. I'm only asking for this modification until we get this new application. On this new application, we'll deal with all of those issues. If we can do it that way, I intend to work on this new application immediately. And if necessary, we will start with the 73 sites instead of 76. I'm not hung up on that.
And I think that's probably the way to address it. And I think staff and you need to work together on that to correct this 73, eventually 76, or however you and staff want to work that out. And I think in the meantime, we can go on. Commissioner Wiedemann, were you finished with your questions?
Yes.
Then we'll go on to Commissioner Purnell.
I don't have any questions. Thank you, Chair Ogle. You have addressed them already.
Thank you. And Commissioner Nelson, any comments or questions?
So these numbers have got me buffaloed. I guess my main question is, regardless of the 73 permitted sites, how many sites can the septic system facilitate?
Well, it's taking care of all the 54 sites as we speak. We're monitoring it almost daily, at least weekly, and I have the reports on it. We'll continue to do so. And if we find there's problems, we'll correct them by either eliminating the sites or adding to or whatever is necessary.
Mr. Exum, I apologize. My question was really for staff. Juliana, can you tell me what the total capacity of the leach fields are? And I understand there's 2 that are on their own leach field, and then there's 2 other facilities. How many sites total can the septic system cover?
So there's 3,129. So that's a total of 6,000 gallons per day capacity. Each campsite with a drain is allocated 100 gallons per day, and campsites without drains are allocated 50 gallons per day capacity. So the number of campsites that I'm going to let Environmental Health also chime in here is 45 sites with hookups and 28 sites without hookups. Christina, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, so essentially he could operate 54 sites. So that would be 5,400 gallons per day, leaving 600 gallons available for half sites.
Which would be?
Without hookup.
Which would be what?
12.
12 tent only sites.
And then they have to be distributed appropriately between the field's capacities.
So would that be 66? 54 and 12?
That's right.
Thank you.
I have a clarifying question on that. Even though allocating the gallons differently for the wet sites and the dry sites, are we even at liberty to make that decision today, since that is not what's before us on the use permit?
Julia, do you want to take that question?
Thank you. Yes. So Julia Acker-Krog, Chief Planner. The answer is no. We cannot modify this permit to add additional connections today. That's not what's been evaluated or presented within the staff report. We would, again, have to ask for a continuance, probably have the applicant submit a revised application that would include a modification as well. And it would likely be that we'd go back to sort of the starting point with this application, route it out to referral agencies again, prepare a revised staff report, and then come back to public hearing with that. And my concern would be that we do have this permit is approaching its expiration on June 1st here. Or it did, and this application has been in process for this last year. And so anyway, today we do not have the liberty to make that change.
Marilyn?
Yes, Commissioner Nelson.
So that wasn't the intent of my question. I was actually waiting till it came back to the commission to further expand on that information.
Okay, where are we now? Do we have everything answered? Are we going on to the public comments, or I guess I'm directing this question to staff. It sounds like all of the commissioners have asked and completed their questions. So I guess, what is our next step?
Yes, so next we are moving to public comment, and this would be when we take a 5-minute pause and give the public the opportunity, if they have not already submitted comments, to submit them to the email, which is pbscommissions@mendocinocounty.org. And after the 5-minute break, we will come back and we will read any of the comments that were received during that 5-minute break and ensure that they're posted to our website. And so we'll start that now.
Okay, thank you. So we'll reconvene at, 11?
So
11:37.
Chairwoman, well, my clock doesn't match your clock. So if it's 5 minutes, I'll be back in 5 minutes.
We'll agree with that. Thank you.
And
It's from Jacob Patterson. And it has been downloaded into the website as comment number 12. And also there was another comment that came in during the meeting was number 11. And that was from Jenny Shattuck.
so if the commission would like to just take a look online, you can take a look at those comments. And if you would like, staff is also happy. It looks like a relatively short comment letter. Staff would be happy to read those if you'd prefer.
I would prefer that, just so I don't have to go to another computer.
Absolutely no problem. So the first comment letter received was from Jenny Shattuck. And the comment was received at 10:16 this morning, and it said, watching meeting regarding phone lines. Many areas along Highway 20 have no internet or cell service. Some areas within a mile of Wildwood have option of dial-up for internet. Having phone service is and can be critical. Please take into consideration. Signed, Jenny Shattuck. Then the second comment letter was received from Jacob Patterson at 11:29 a.m. And it states, I have two additional comments based on the discussion today. First, please explicitly permit the continuance of the above ground landline phone connections for the park residents, perhaps amending the special condition. Second, if the county permitted all of the septic installations, in parentheses, i.e. all work and campsite connections were accomplished and signed off and issued permits by the county, end of parentheses, requiring the property owner to remove properly permitted connections, it does not make sense for the use permit to limit the connections after the county already allowed the work. Another option is to reallocate the septic capacity from the campsites without septic connections, i.e. the 50 gallons per day or 1/2 the required capacity of a site with a septic connection, to the 9 additional campsite connected to the septic system. The easiest solution is to reduce the use of the non-connected campsites to keep the use within the septic capacity. There is no need to maintain septic capacity for the dry campsites. The last thing the community needs is 9 additional homeless families. The 54 connected sites providing actual housing should be prioritized over the temporary dry campsites. That could be addressed by allowing slightly more flexibility in the language of the special condition. And that's the end of the 2 additional comment letters. And then the other 10 were previously posted and available on the website.
Thank you, Julia. And I think we've had the opportunity to review most of the other comments, and I believe we've addressed a lot of the items. One of them that we've kind of gone over, and I'm hoping perhaps the applicant, and perhaps he already has, met with the neighbor regarding that area where there's a water issue and perhaps effluent. And as you mentioned, they really need to resolve that themselves. So I think that's pretty much been taken care of. So at this point, and I appreciate the letters that have come in, I'm perfectly fine with the overhead phone lines. I agree with the other 2 comments that have just come in, but I don't know if we need to change that one condition where it says all of the utilities need to be underground. So perhaps staff could address that.
If I could.
So my question is the public meeting session closed, and are we at the commission now?
Thank you. I don't know if we can close it until we address the items that have come in. Staff, can you help me with that?
Yes, Commissioner Ogle, or Chair Ogle, excuse me, you may end, you can close the public comment period here and return it back to the commission.
Thank you. Then the public comment period is closed, and we will bring it back to the commission and staff. I believe, thank you, Jillian.
I'd like to just talk about the telephone lines for briefly. There's not a condition related to undergrounding the utilities. It is a regulation in our zoning code. That table and item 12 in the staff report, it is on page 7 and 8, and I list the development standards for campgrounds on page 7 and 8 in table 6. Item 12 in Table 6 lists one of the 13 standards for operating a campground. And one of the development standards for a campground is all utilities shall be placed underground. I did not include this regulation as a recommended condition. So it's not part of the use permit conditions of approval. It is part of the county code requirements for operating a campground.
So where does that leave it?
So I think that tells us the use permit would not require the telephone lines to be removed.
Okay, thank you. I think we're clear on that one. Any other questions or comments from the commissioners to staff or from staff to the commission?
I have a question for staff, probably Juliana. Juliana, you mentioned 5 or 6 years you've been working on this project. I think it's clear, but I want to make sure over the 5 or 6 years you've been working on this, you have made it clear to the applicant what's required to permit a mobile home park, long-term occupancy, expansions, the general plan amendment, that sort of thing, that, this option's been available to them for a few years now and we have yet to see an application. Is that right?
Right, especially the last time the commission considered this application, there was a lot of discussion about being able to change the use to a longer occupancy than less than monthly basis. So there was analysis in the staff report regarding the possibility of operating a mobile home park. And there are different standards for a mobile home park. One of the ones that's really obvious is the area designated for a campsite is about 20 by 40 feet. And an area designated for a mobile home site is almost twice the area. So we have discussed these development standards and these changes with the applicant, especially over the last 6 months, as they have expressed interest in filing a general plan amendment application. I anticipate one to come in shortly. My impression is it will come in very quickly, that they will apply to operate a mobile home park after getting the general plan classification and the zoning district changed.
Okay, so it's fair to say that this wasn't a surprise, that, this extension, that they're aware of this, they know the remedy to get the outcome that they're seeking, and it's kind of in their court to make that application.
Right, they're very understanding that the recommendation to extend the use permit is based on the fact that they're willing to resolve the long-term occupancy by making some changes to the land use and applying for a mobile home park use permit.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions or comments for staff or the applicant?
So back to my point of the 54 sites versus the ones he actually has now, or the permitted sites versus the one he has now. If I understood correctly, he actually has enough capacity for 66 sites. My thinking is to go ahead and grant the exception or grant the extension for 5 years, with the understanding that he's going to go ahead and apply for the new permit, and also at the same time he can apply for the additional campsites, the 66 or whatever number he needs, so that he's still in compliance with the septic tank requirements. We have been, I think, very accommodating. He has also made a number of adjustments. He's you can see where he's tried hard, and I think we can just leave it as it is, with the understanding that he makes more improvements, and at the same time grant him this 5-year extension.
Okay, thank you. I did have a couple of items for staff that I think were going to be addressed I'm not sure that we need to address the condition for the lighting and the machinery based on Mr. Exum's comments about having a new maintenance person, and that the hours now are not happening in the middle of the night. So staff, I don't think we need to address that. Condition number 17 I had, there were, that was about legal removed. I'm sorry, that's all I have on my notes. And I don't know if there were any other items that needed to be changed, other than, of course, the dates on the resolution. And so staff, help me out. Is there any other thing that we need prior to looking at a motion?
Thank you, Chair Ogle, Julia Acker-Krog. So I think what you were reflecting in the legally removed portion was condition 17B, which right now reads abandoned vehicles shall be immediately removed from the property. And I believe it was Commissioner Perkins who suggested that it states legally removed from the property. And then there was from Commissioner Purnell the desire to add a condition requiring that by December 31st of 2020, the owner has reduced the number of campsites to be in conformity with the use permit. And it's unclear to me from the discussion that's happened as to whether or not that's still a desire of the commission to add that language.
I think not. I think we need to just keep on pretending that we know how many campsites there are.
And Commissioner Purnell, I think we need.
I'm sorry. I would agree with Commissioner Purnell's suggestion.
Commissioner Purnell or Commissioner Holkamp? Mr. Nelson, was that Commissioner Holkamp you meant?
Commissioner Purnell. Did you hear that?
Yes, Commissioner Purnell, perhaps you could chime in on this.
Sure. So my thinking is this, and bear with me for just a second. I'm in the staff report on table 1, capacity of campground, and that really summarizes a lot of what we've been talking about there, which is that, you know, the use permit, which if I'm reading that right, that was issued in 1972. Is that correct, Juliana? Yeah, okay, I'm getting affirmative nods. So since 1972, County of Mendocino has approved 73 campsites, with 45 of those having the septic hookup. The Department of Environmental Health has also approved that for purposes of wastewater treatment. And then the state of California is also mimicking that, although they're actually allowing fewer total campsites. So Mendocino County is actually being more generous with the applicant than the state is, but that the applicant is beyond that. And I think some of the key points in here are that the septic system, I'm just reading from the report here, is that the recently expanded capacity is appropriate for 45 sites with septic hookups. There is insufficient capacity for 9 additional connections. And if we're talking about concerns of during high water table times that effluent is flowing onto neighbors' properties, that's a concern to me. And I also recall 18 months ago when we last heard this issue, I did take a tour through the property, a self-guided tour. And my concern at the time was really about the density of people in the forest and concerns around fire and crime, and, you know, the crime logs coming out of there. And so I am going to need to stay with what the use permit is here and what staff is recommending, that it be 73 campsites total with 45 sites with a septic hookup, because I think it is a fundamental matter of health and safety on all of those fronts.
So my understanding was that Commissioner Purnell wanted to put a timeline on when they resolve the problem. So maybe I misunderstood.
No, I do want a timeline because I think this is a semi-urgent issue of health and safety, and I don't want to let it slide for another 4 years. And I think without a timeline for conformity, it will slide for another 4 years. I want people to be safe there.
I have a question. If we add the timeline trigger and they don't meet it, the county has not shown a lot of enthusiasm for enforcing the terms of this permit to begin with. So if the timeline's not met, they are violating their permit. If we don't add a timeline and they don't reduce the amount of campsites, they're still violating the terms of their permit. I'm happy to add one. I'd like it if we added one that it actually be, useful and enforced, but I'm not sure that it would. And I just wonder if the outcome would be the same with or without the language in the condition.
And if I may, Julia Acker-Krog, Chief Planner. So the language that I have tentatively written up for that condition, which we can talk about once you have your deliberation a little bit more too, but would include a sentence at the end of it that basically states that failure to comply shall result in the initiation of revocation of the use permit. And a revocation process, we have not done those very commonly in Mendocino County. But that would essentially bring this back in front of the Planning Commission for them to consider whether or not the terms of the permit have been violated, such that the use permit and the entire entitlement should be revoked.
Is it true that failure to comply with any of the terms is just generally grounds for revoking the permit? And that language is just kind of reiterating what's true about all the conditions of approval?
That is correct. Condition number 6, which is our standard condition, states that if any one of the permit conditions is violated, then it is grounds for initiation of a revocation process of the use permit.
I have a question, if I may, Chair.
Please go ahead, Diana.
So my understanding is, and I understand this, what's before us is this use permit and renewal with the conditions that are put forth and with the changes and modifications that we covered today. But I also want to understand that the owner can come back to the planning department. And because for me, there's a little confusion with Christina's environmental health saying, well, they actually have capacity for more hookups, even though maybe I misunderstood that. But if we pass this as for these 73 campsites allowed, including 45 hookups, the owner has the capacity to come back to planning, even while they're processing a general plan amendment application, to do what might be like an immaterial amendment to this use permit?
That is correct. That they would have the opportunity to have multiple applications in tandem pending the outcome of that final general plan amendment and rezone. And usually if we have 2 entitlements going in similar tracks, we will ensure that as part of what is the final plan, so say they do the general plan amendment and rezone and major use permit for a mobile home park, we would ensure that the permits issued for transient habitation would be null and void with the granting of a mobile home park permit.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Unless there are any other questions or comments, I think we're looking for a motion, although I don't know if there were any changes to the conditions of approval. Have we covered all that, Julia?
Thank you, Chair Ogle. So, at this time, staff, there's been, a number of changes discussed. I think the date changes are relatively simple, as well as the additional condition that was suggested by Commissioner Purnell and Commissioner Nelson was in agreement with as well. And I do have some as well as we incorporated the changes presented by staff in the memorandum. But, I think for county staff, my concern would be that with today's meeting, I think there was a lot of information going back and forth. And one thing I would want to ensure is that our findings as well as the conditions would be written to the satisfaction of the commission. So while I think you should entertain, and I might defer to county council on this, that it may be appropriate to entertain a motion, but I think that the final vote on that motion should wait pending review of the resolution, which staff would request that that be done at a future meeting to allow council and county staff time to work on that resolution together.
Deputy County Counsel Matthew Kudrowski, I think I would say if the commission wants to give direction to staff in terms of how to, with the resolution and any additions to the resolution that it is desiring, and bring that resolution back at the continued hearing for consideration.
Could staff help summarize the changes to the resolution that we've covered?
Yes. Sorry, making sure I'm unmuted. So the changes that have been covered at this point were the changes in the dates, which are on page 1 of the resolution at the top of the header, and the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th whereas clauses, as well as on page 3 of Exhibit A, which is the conditions of approval at the top header. And then in addition to that, there are the changes contained from the memorandum presented by staff to conditions 10A, B, and C that solely reflect which office they would be and which numbers, sort of the contact information for that environmental health and the compliance with those conditions. Then we also had condition 17B, which the desire was to add the word legally in between the words immediately and removed. And that would read then, abandoned vehicles shall be immediately, legally, removed from the property. And then condition 21, which was also contained in the memorandum, which would be revised based upon the discussion here from what's presented in the memorandum to read, beginning on January 1, 2021 and annually thereafter, and then it would continue stating as presented in the memo that the property owner shall demonstrate to the Director of Planning and Building Services that the campgrounds have been inspected by the California Department of Housing and Community Development by filing copies of HCD reports with the PBS Fort Bragg office located at 120 West First Street, Fort Bragg. And then finally, based upon the comments from Commissioner Purnell and Commissioner Nelson, staff drafted up tentative language for an additional condition number 26, which would read, prior to December 31st, 2020, the owner shall reduce the number of campsites to 73 campsites with 45 with septic hookups and 28 without septic hookups. Failure to comply shall result in initiation of revocation of the use permit. And that would conclude the changes that I've captured. If I've missed any that the commissioners are aware of, please let me know.
I think you've captured everything. I just want to be clear on the on number 26, and we'll go with we'll go with Commissioner Wiedemann.
I kind of have a problem with that 26. I'm not sure it's necessary with the use permit. Everything else is defined above in the use permit. That's my feeling, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Perkins, did you have your hand up?
No, but Commissioner Holkamp, I'll pass the mic.
I just had a question about condition 11C, where we are with that.
Can we finish on the 26th Amendment or
Sure.
change? So after hearing it read and the discussion, I think I would have to agree with Commissioner Wiedemann that it isn't necessary.
So if I understand correctly, then it sounds like we have Commissioner Wiedemann as well as Commissioner Purnell stating that the condition 26 does not seem necessary. Do we have a majority of the commission that is agreeing that that condition is not necessary? I see we have Commissioner Holkamp and Commissioner Perkins. So So with that, then staff would not include the language that I just read about condition 26. And then, but all the other changes as I read would be remaining.
I'm comfortable with that. All the other commissioners I think I can ask you to raise your hand if you're not. Let's see.
I still have the issue of 11C.
Okay, let's address 11C, and that has to do with the lodging
just
services.
Says blanket, everything is going to be less than monthly basis. And since we know for the last 10 years that hasn't been so, I'm thinking maybe we should eliminate that condition.
So Julia Acker-Krog, Chief Planner, as I said when that discussion first came up, I have some serious concerns about that, because essentially then we would not be compliant with the transient habitation land use and the zoning code that is applicable for this type of activity. So staff is opposed to that change.
Okay. I guess pretending is always good.
So I would have.
Go ahead, Greg.
You're muted.
Go ahead, Greg.
Okay, so unmuted now. So I agree with staff. I think in spite of the fact that it's been an ongoing violation, we leave it like it is, and hope, well, if it's not corrected with the new application, then we refuse it.
Whatever.
Okay. If there's nothing else, I think I'm looking for a motion.
Just to be clear, is the motion to direct staff to revise the resolution to bring back to a later date? Was that the thought from Deputy County Counsel Kudrowski?
Deputy County Counsel Matthew Kudrowski, I'll pose this question to staff as well. Staff's read out, I think, changes that are fairly straightforward based on this discussion. Do we want to come back at a meeting, or is this something we think we can accomplish today?
I think Julia Acker-Krog. So I think, if the commission is satisfied with the changes that I read into the record, then I think you could proceed today. If you would like to see that more formally presented in a red line version of the resolution, then staff would request that we continue this item to a date certain. So that's really where staff falls on that.
I'm comfortable with the way it is. How about the other commissioners?
I'm comfortable to vote.
So that said, since it's in my district, I guess I get to make my first motion. I move that by resolution, the Planning Commission grant major use permit renewal UR 2019-0001 with a new term concluding on June 1st, 2024 for the project based on the facts and findings and subject to the recommended conditions of approval, with the changes to conditions presented by staff in the memorandum and the modifications to the resolution made at today's hearing.
I'll second that. I'll second that.
So that was a motion by Commissioner Perkins and a second by Commissioner Holkamp.
Correct.
Shall we do a roll call?
Commissioner Wiedemann,
Yes.
Commissioner Purnell,
Yes.
Commissioner Nelson,
Yes.
Commissioner Holkamp,
Yes.
Commissioner Perkins,
Yes.
Chair Ogle.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, go ahead, Jim.
Passes unanimously.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think at this point, it's set really to staff and to the applicant to tie up any loose ends that we have in there.
I just want to thank Juliana Cherry for doing a great job on that. That was not an easy application.
It was not, and I second that. Thank you so much, Juliana and Julia, for all the hard work you've done. And I'm pleased to see that we still can work with the applicant to supply the needed housing that there is on the coast. Thank you.
So thank you, Commissioners. So with that, the item 6A has been approved, subject to the conditions and the revised and the revisions made at the meeting here today. So we'll be preparing the revised resolution for signature. So.
Great.
And we'll go on to item number 7, matters from staff. Are there any items from staff?
Pardon me.
Pardon.
Working for me.
So yeah, I would be willing to make a motion that we nominate Commissioner Holkamp to sit as a planning commissioner representative on the Airport Land Use Commission.
Okay, that's item number 8. You're kind of jumping ahead there. Did we
No,
have any
that's
matters?
item
6B on mine.
Oh, you know, I'm looking at a revised one that I think only I have. So, County Council, did you want to weigh in on this? I don't know. I see you up on.
Yep. Deputy County Council Matthew Kudrowski. It's item 6B on the posted agenda for the nomination.
So what I've heard is a motion by Commissioner Nelson for nominating Commissioner Holkamp to sit as the Planning Commission representative on the Airport Land Use Commission. And for the benefit of the commission and the public, this would replace Commissioner Jacob Zune on the commission, on the Airport Land Use Commission, excuse me. Let me make sure that's clear. So we have a motion, and then I think is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. So Commissioner Purnell has seconded.
Commissioner Wiedemann? Commissioner Wiedemann?
Yes.
Commissioner Holkamp?
Yeah.
Commissioner Perkins?
Yes.
Commissioner Purnell?
Yes.
Commissioner Nelson?
Yes.
Congratulations.
Oh.
Chair Ogle,
Sorry. Chair
I was
Ogle.
off for a while. It was good while it lasted.
yes, I do have one other item under matters from commission.
One moment, Marilyn, I think if we could just briefly close that item out. So as we understood it, we had a unanimous vote on that. So Commissioner Holkamp is formally nominated to sit as the Planning Commission representative on the Airport Land Use Commission. So then I think next we're on to matters from staff, which
No,
I have none.
I still have a matter for commission.
Which comes right after matters from staff here. So I just wanted to make sure it was clear for the record that I have no matters from staff.
Thank you. I'm working on a different agenda. Unless I'm incorrect, I was looking at the map and I see where Commissioner Nelson's ag representative ends the end of this month. Is that correct, or has that been extended?
That's correct. I haven't heard back from the Board of Supervisors yet. I did submit my application.
And thank you. Actually, we do have an update for this. So Commissioner Nelson is
was confirmed by the Board of Supervisors on Tuesday's in Tuesday's meeting.
Yes, so you are confirmed.
Oh, goody.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for considering. Do we need to vote on that as well, or is that just come from the Board of Supervisors?
No, that solely comes from the Board of Supervisors.
Okay, then hopefully we have that I'm kind of on board with the agenda. I see no other items except for a motion to adjourn. Is that correct?
So moved.
I'll second it.
Okay, all in favor? Raise your hand.
Aye.
Let's go.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank you, commissioners. We wish you a good day and hope that everyone stays healthy and safe out there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You, Madam Chairman, good job.
Yep. Good job.
Hmm.